Well, good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to the January breakfast. It's cold out, so I wasn't expecting a whole lot. Glad you all made it. We got a very informational presentation. I won't embarrass Scott. Scott was our planning director when I was elected. He has a wealth of information and background and experience, but he has done a wonderful job as a planning director, explaining things. Tim and Philip especially, always got a good problem. But Scott will break things down in a way that everybody can understand. Things I didn't understand, Scott really helped me to learn as well. So a lot of what I was hoping Scott would talk about, but also there's been a few people who actually aren't here today that really had a lot of questions about zoning and how that works, the whole process, and some who had some concerns about zoning applications in one district that border another district and not get notified. All of that can be explained today. The expert is here. But if you have any questions or thoughts on zoning, a lot of what Scott's going to talk about today will be informative and seeing the places for people. That was something that was kind of getting started when I got elected and looking at building density in different places. I won't steal his thunder, but it's something I really hope more people pay attention to as we look to continue developing in the city. Because it's really important. There's other elements of it that I think needs to be implemented. We haven't fully got started on that. So today will be a really informative breakfast with Scott. Really excited about being here. I will overhype everybody right now, but I really always appreciate all his presentations. You'll hear a little bit of what our dad hears when they go through their training and they go over zoning and what that looks like. So that's why everyone always asks more questions. All the dads around the city. But we always have a good breakfast. Glad to start the year off with Scott. So turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, high expectations. We'll see if I can live up to them. One thing that I'm realizing is that it might be helpful to have a clicker. I don't know if we've got one. You've got one? Okay. You are way ahead of me on this one. Okay. So should I stand this phone on? I've got plugged into the Facebook system.
Oh, that is audio. It's all in the ceiling.
Okay, fantastic. And if I move around, can you follow me? Yeah. Okay, because I might move up by the screen. Is that helpful for everyone? That way you don't have to look in two different directions. Okay, so I will head that way, but before I do, I want to make sure that this is useful to you all, because as Councilmember Jonathan knows, I love to talk. And Lori is smiling right now. She didn't know why, you know that I love to talk. So the question more for me is, I've heard things that are important to the council member, and I'll definitely make sure that we cover those. I would also like to check to see what questions you have. I mean, I'm not going to answer them right now, but I want to make a list of things to make sure that we cover. So, do you have anything that you would like to cover? Anybody, any questions? Okay, that's great, because as we go along, if you have questions, please just raise your hand and just let me know. And then we'll pause and we'll address it there, or if it's a really lengthy discussion, I'll say, let's hold on to that thought. I'll write, try and write it down, and then we'll save it for the end. Does that sound like a fair deal? Okay, how much time do we have?
2 hours.
I hear some laughing, so I'm not really sure what the right answer is here. So maybe finish like around 11 o'clock maybe? Is that too long? Okay, we'll check in. How about that? We'll check in at like 10:30, something like that. Okay. You're really worried, you're wondering what did you just sign up for here? Okay, so the first thing that I think it'd be good if we can cover would be how about let's talk a little bit about the planning department. And then the second thing that we'll talk about is how planning operation, how we functionally do planning in Wichita, and then we can talk about places for people last. Because that's kind of, the first two are kind of like what we do and how we do it, and then the last part is what we've done with this particular project. Does that sound fair? Okay. One of the things too, so if you want to, if you can bring up the one, it's white and it's green and it talks about the planning department. It's an orientation PowerPoint. While he's bringing that up, I will talk just briefly about my. Oh, sorry about that. Wait, I didn't hear it. I was your cat.
Thank you.
I'll talk briefly about my adventures. I came out of grad school in 2003. I grew up in the Denver area and went out to Illinois for undergraduate, came back to Denver for graduate school, got my master's in urban and regional planning, and then was fresh out of school when I got the opportunity to do a job interview here in Wichita. It was for an associate planner position with a gentleman named Dave Barber. He was fantastic. And ultimately, they made me a job offer. And so here's where I moved after grad school, straight out of grad school. So I started as an associate planner. I've been here for 21 years now in Wichita. So Wichita is my home. I'm very proud to be here and to have been able to serve the community for that long. I worked as an associate planner and then was promoted to be a senior planner. At that time, I was working a lot on bicycle and pedestrian projects. The planning department is a joint city and county department. We'll talk more about that. At that time, the county commission determined that they really did not like the idea of funding 50% of activities for bicycle and pedestrian planning and some other things. They didn't see them as core functions. And so the planning department budget was cut. My position was moved into the city manager's office, and I was given the role of overseeing the parking system for the city of Wichita. So I did parking, bicycling, pedestrian activities, those kind of coordination. I did that for about a couple of years, and then was moved over to the transit department and served as the interim director there for a period of 9 months. It's probably one of the most stressful 9 months of my life, but it was quite the adventure, and I learned a lot from it. And then after that, I served in the transit department. It was changed transportation department, did parking and bicycle, all that kind of function. And then in 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I moved over to the planning department as the interim planning director. And the first week I was there, we had the all hands department directors meetings about what are we going to do because this new thing called COVID. So that's kind of been my adventure, my journey, and just real quick highlights on that. So with that, I'll go ahead and pivot and we'll talk more about the department functions. So let's see if I can see it, but unfortunately it's not quite. If we can go to, yeah, I'll break it to that. Maybe it's they need to point in direction. And if we need to, we can just, I can just ask, you know, if you can advance it, I can do it that way. Sure. Next slide. Apparently my PowerPoint is overwhelmed the computer. And that's probably a bad sign for you all, if you're wondering how many slides.
392.
I think there really is like 300, but we'll go through the 300. Okay, well, while we're working on the technology, I'll just talk about the planning department, then we can go ahead and cruise past those parts. So the planning department was created many, many years ago, I think in the 1960s or 70s. And it's formed, it's neither a city department nor a county department, it's both. It's formed through an interlocal agreement. And in the state of Kansas, the attorney general, the state level, has to sign off on an interlocal agreement. So it's an agreement between the two entities saying this is how we're going to operate, how we're going to function. The planning department and the planning commission are created through that interlocal agreement. The interlocal agreement specifies that the city and county will contribute 50% of the funding. So our funding revenue is 50% from the county, 50% from the city, but it's minus the revenues that are collected from application fees. So at the end of the year, if we have any surplus funding that's left over, it's divided in half and sent back to the city and sent back to the county. So we do not operate with a surplus at all. We have no reserve to draw on, which my wife works in the budget office. She's actually the budget officer for the city of Wichita. And she always tells me that I'm going to be in a lot of trouble if we go over budget. More so than other departments, because it creates all kinds of other things that need to So we're very conscientious of that.
Is that state law that you have to have a zero out at the end of the year?
I'm not sure.
I just wonder if you might be able to change that.
Yeah, that's come up in some conversations, so, but I don't know, we'll see, yeah. The so what we do in the planning department is we do current plans, activities for the city and the county, and those include zoning changes. So if someone has a residentially zoned property and they want to make it into an industry, so they would go through the rezoning process. That's what they would go through us. And we do that not for the entire county, thank you, but for just the city of Wichita and the unincorporated county. The cities, the other cities in Sedgwick County have their own planning functions and planning. They're usually not a planning department unless they're fairly big, but usually a staff person. We also do subdivision cases. So if you want to take a piece of property and you want to split it up, divide it, or in fact, if you just want to build something on it that doesn't meet a specified number of exemptions, you have to plat it. Because the community makes you do that because we need to know how are you going to access it, how are you going to get utilities to it, all of these things. So they make you go through the platting process for that. And I would love to spend a lot of time talking with you about the platting process and the ramifications of platting, and we'll highlight it, touch on it. We'll see if you have any questions. Okay, very good, awesome. Thanks for getting us going. So here's our mission. So we provide the planning services for Wichita and Sedgwick County. It's really to help implement the community investments plan, which is our comprehensive plan, kind of the overarching plan for our communities. And we do that in order to help achieve the goals of growing the economy, providing opportunities for living well, and more. When I first got here, it just said growing the economy. Well, if we simply wanted to grow the economy, we could put smeltering plants all over the place and hog farms and all kinds of things that might not contribute to the quality of life as much, especially if they're in close proximity. So I really think that what we are doing is we are providing an opportunity for a balancing act between the two. And it's up to the community to tell us what's the best fit for Wichita, right? It's not necessarily what other communities are doing. So we provide a variety of services in order to help achieve implementing the community investments plan. So what that entails is zoning, subdivision, comprehensive plan. We talked just briefly about all of those. Customer service is a given. We do area and neighborhood plans. So we're currently working on the College Hill neighborhood plan. We're also working with the Midtown area. I've got a lot to say about neighborhood plans, but in brief, they are very helpful, I think, when there's not clear community direction consensus about what direction to move forward with the neighborhood. And if you want to have a process to have that dialogue and then come out with these are the things that we agree on, that is a great process to get through. And it can really help if you've got good community planning area plans. When these zoning questions come up about, hey, I'm a property owner and I want to do this on my property, and it creates a lot of kind of conversation and disruption, the neighborhood plans can help head that off because we already know that there's consensus about this particular direction and what's appropriate. I'll give you an example of that. South Central neighborhood plan, it says, we recommend that there not be new car lots in South Central neighborhood. In that way, that was something that was coming up quite a bit in that area. Since the neighborhood plan, it's helped the property owners in the area to understand what the general consensus and preferred direction in the area is, so that it kind of heads off a lot of conversations. And when applications come in, staff have clear direction in terms of what the recommendations should be. Does that all make sense? Okay, so that's one way that neighborhood plans are helpful. The other way they're helpful is when it comes to infrastructure investments and decisions. So are we going to expand the roadway? Should we expand the roadway? Should we have bicycle facilities? Do we need to do something with the parks? It helps provide clear direction or guidance about what should happen. Now, plans are always recommendations. They're not absolutes in terms of this is absolute what's going to happen, right? Because you've got other processes where the decisions are made, final decisions. Okay, we also do historic preservation. This is primarily a city of Wichita function.
Do you, sorry, for
Yeah.
historic preservation, do you help, I mean, I know she's retired.
Kathy Morgan.
Yeah, is she still there?
No.
Yeah.
So, so here's what's happened with historic preservation planning is that when I first came in 2003, there was a dedicated historic preservation planner position. There was also an intern position, and later on, kind of an associate kind of planner position that's helping the boundary planning aid. As part of the budget constraints and process, those positions were essentially eliminated, and the historic planning function is now a planner position. So Christina Reith, we were fortunate to hire someone who has historic preservation background. She is in a current planning position and works on historic preservation projects. Whereas the nuance is very small, but it's important because she's not in a historic preservation planning position. And the preservation board has said they're advocating for additional resources similar to other boards. In this case, for historic
Yeah,
preservation.
Christine's amazing.
Good to hear. That's very good to hear.
Quick question, Scott.
Yeah.
Who normally leads or heads up these planning groups? Here's that neighborhood association.
For a neighborhood plan?
Yeah.
Okay, so for a neighborhood plan, part of any plan, if we do our job well, then it should get through the process ideally with probably some controversy, but it should be something that at the end of the day, everyone can say, you know what, we may not like it, but we can live with it. Some people will be ecstatic about it. Some people will be like, but it's generally at the end of the day, something everyone can live with. Well, but I'm not quite done yet because there's more to it. Because in order to get to that point, that we typically put a steering committee together, and the steering committee is often made up of residents, business owners, anyone who we have representatives who can bring perspectives of groups that have a stake in the neighborhood, whether it's, and sometimes we like to have a technical advisory committee because there are people who don't, maybe shouldn't have a seat at the table for the decision making about what should be in the plan, but they have important information like the school district and others, maybe some nonprofits. Sometimes we invite them to be part of the technical advisory. So through those two committees and other public outreach efforts, open houses, surveys, that kind of stuff, we hope to get a good picture about what the general consensus is of the neighborhood. So what else, Lonnie? Did it cover it?
Yeah, so I guess I'm wondering, who started the initiation?
Okay. So you guys are asking all kinds of good questions. And that's a good thing. So with the neighborhood plan, the way, in some cases, we have done neighborhood plans internally in the past. One of the dynamics that you're going to see in here in this presentation is that our department is very young. There are a number of people in our department, probably the majority of our department's been in the planning department for probably 5 years or less. The other thing too is that our positions, we don't quite have all of them filled. So it leads to a combination where hiring a consultant is very advantageous for us. Because when you hire a consultant, they can do you hire them for 3 reasons, really. You don't have the time, you don't have the talent or the knowledge, right? The other one is you don't want to take the heat. You don't want to take the heat on it about if they come out with a recommendation. Those are 3 main reasons, not always the same, right? They don't always follow in the same order, but those are generally the 3. In this case, I have said, look, we really, if we're going to do a wholesale plan or an update to a plan like Midtown, we really need to bring in a consultant team to help us out with that, because we don't have the knowledge, we don't have the time, and it can help us with the dynamics of the questions prompting what should happen. So in terms of who initiates it, it's a budgetary process, because if you're going to hire a consultant, you need funding. We don't have that funding as part of our normal budget. So it comes down to a decision of allocation during the budget process.
Except you could if you could carry that money.
Well, actually, for those we do, because those are often, those are projects, and once you encumber the funds, once we get a consultant team to help us, it's encumbered so it doesn't get swept.
Yes, sir. I guess what I'm bringing here is that you mentioned these, city has this county as well, comprehensive. So that includes an area process, what they look like, economic development, community development, going forward. So within those, you have neighborhood associations, schools, all these. Under that umbrella, maybe it's an area which they're saying, hey, this big piece, we got a piece here, we want to develop here, such. So you might call it by the city, but at some point in time, you have to outreach to those who are community effects. I guess when you talk about College Hill and some of the other Midtown, these are active neighborhood associations who actually meet. Active associations, you have a lot of inactive ones. So, how do you reach out to those are? They are quite neighborhood. We do have some input.
It's gonna vary depending on the neighborhood in terms of the outreach, but in general, we will do an online survey. If we have the funding, we will do a mail out survey that's statistically representative. We will also hope to have people on the steering committee who provide those various perspectives. Sometimes we will do door hangers or notifications in neighborhood newsletters, association newsletters. We will try any and all avenues that we think will be a good fit for return on investment in terms of funding and effort and input that we receive. So, yep, I'm gonna keep moving. Ready? Keep going? Okay. Yeah.
Talk about budget, and then we heard about that, we have planning to continue this full-time service, right?
Mhm.
So, I don't understand the reason. Is that because budget cuts? Is it because those funds were used for other things? So I'm kind of interested in that. I have interest in budgeting. The other thing that really gave me pause, I appreciate that you're honest with this, but you hire consultants to take the key. Damn. I'm gonna have to ponder that.
Well,
But, wow,
Well,
that
think-
seems like,
well,
maybe I need to.
yeah. Let me give you some context on that. Because the majority of the time, it's, in our cases, if we're doing a neighborhood plan, it's not to take the key. But there is one instance where I did go out and ask for a consultant to come in because I wanted them to take the heat. And that was when we get to subdivision regulations. Because in subdivision, there is the development community, there's some stakeholders who have been pushing to reduce the number of connections between subdivisions. And so if I, as a staff person, come out and I say, by golly, we ought to have tons of connections between subdivisions, and by golly, it's gonna have all these benefits, then I'm turning it into Scott Wadel's pushing for these changes or these actions, as opposed to if I bring in a consultant who has experience from across the country and can talk about what other communities have done. And if the stakeholders don't like the message that that consultant is providing, then it becomes into a situation of, okay, we got the information, we had the discussion, people are upset, we don't have to invite that consultant back again. But we got the information, I appreciate that. So that is an example where the temperature in the room on that discussion was so high, it was helpful to have someone from the outside come and have that conversation with us.
What did it cost, you know?
Oh,
and
and
not
that-
to dig into-
I think it was like $1,200. And the thing is, we benefited from having their expertise about what they've done in other communities. So it was more than just taking the heat, but that was a big part of it for me.
Oh, yeah.
Is it- is it-
We're talking tens of thousands.
No. For those where we're talking $50,000, $25,000, we're really talking about, we're hiring someone because we don't have the time. Because that's a lot of time that someone's investing. For that kind of contract, they're spending a lot of hours on it. Yeah, it's not like I'm bringing in a lawyer with like lots of bling and they're like, oh, no, for one.
Well, I just wanna ask, you know, I hate urban sprawl.
I do now. No, I don't. Nah, I'm just-
So the subdivisions, the connectedness is putting roads between the two of them, so you don't have one entrance or more than one entrance, is that what that means?
Yeah, that's what that conversation is.
And they want it or they don't?
Well, here's the thing about, and I'm sorry, I told you we were gonna take, how about, okay, I'll give you a snapshot and then we can talk more about it in a little bit, right? I think what we're seeing in some of our developments in the city is we're seeing that people are buying, some people, not maybe a vocal minority, I don't know if it's the majority or not. But I have been in meetings about this topic where people do not want a connection from their subdivisions to the adjoining subdivision. They just bought a house, they just moved in, and there's drug dealers in that other neighborhood, and they're speeding, and they're causing all kinds of problems. I'm not ruling out that that could be legitimate, but in that particular meeting, the police department was there, and they said, no, people who have gotten busted for speeding actually live in your subdivision. The people who are, yada, 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 it turns out it's the people in the subdivision, not the ones next door. But what's happened is that as you reduce the number of streets and connections in the neighborhood, more and more people use the fewer and fewer connections that are left. So and the way that we design our streets in these subdivisions can contribute to people speeding, because we build them wide so that you can have parking on both sides. When there's not parking, people fly because it's a runway.
Yeah.
So anyway, fewer connections results in poor design, or maybe not optimal design choices, can lead to faster traffic, more traffic. So it really degrades the quality of life for the people and the ability to sell those lots on the edges. Plus, in some cases, you're selling to a clientele who really wants to have isolation, right? Like they're buying isolation to say, I live in the subdivision where people are buying houses equivalent to what mine is.
And they look exactly like mine.
And so then you run into the dynamic of, okay, so we could only have one street going into the subdivision. But the challenge that happens is, what do you do if there's a fire? What do you do? Look at what happened in LA right now. I saw a headline just this week that said there was only one way out in the neighborhood. And people have to abandon their cars, and traffic's not moving, and all this kind of stuff. I'm not saying all of that is because there's one injury, but I'm telling you, there was a headline. Also, I've seen it in Colorado. We have disasters happen. We had one in Wichita here where a crash happened in front of the subdivision. It was one way in, one way out, and it shut down access to the subdivision for a matter of hours. So, on the flip side of that is so the dialogue is what should happen with the subdivision process of those. So, I'm gonna keep going because we're not making much headway here, but there's a lot of good questions. Come back to this one in a bit, but this is a really important topic, and every community wrestles with this, and it almost deserves its own conversation if y'all are invited at a later date. Okay, are you okay to move on? Okay, so we've got in all these really in-depth and great conversations. I'm going like way back to the beginning. Okay, so this is where we operate. Is everyone familiar with the Rady building?
Yeah.
The old IRS building? It's fun, it's a cool place, right? Okay, so in terms of our budget, we're about $2.5 million. We have about 20 staff, so we're a very, very small department. We're going through the interlocal agreement, you can see it online, it's pretty exciting stuff. And so how we're funded is 50/50 contribution to the city minus the piece that collect for application cases. There's this thing about a county reimbursement for zoning enforcement. That's a division, 1 out of 4 divisions in the planning department, kind of its own separate animal. So when I talk about our budget largely, I'm not talking about them. They're the people who will go out, if you're operating a business in your house, you shouldn't be, they're the ones who will write you the letter and go investigate and all that. They only do the zoning enforcement for the city of Wichita, not for the county. MABCD does that. The other thing to know is that zoning enforcement is involved in liquor licensing and sign, and a whole bunch of other small permit reviews. So here's our big funding sources: GO funding, county GO funding, and charges for services. Really big conversation going on right now. We've got lots of big conversations going on right now about funding, because the question is coming up: should we raise the fees for our applications? Right now, the city and the county subsidize our efforts to process cases. We estimate that they are subsidizing about 77%, 75% of what it takes for us to process an application. The people paying the fees are covering the rest. So in terms of our capture rate, or in terms of our funding that we receive from the fees, it's only 20% to 25%. Okay, so we talked about the big 2 splits in the planning department. We won't go much further than that on that one. In terms of our revenue, again, the majority is from, this is city, this is county, and then reimbursement and then the fees that we collect. So, and this is overall, the numbers I just gave you verbally were specifically for what it takes for us to process applications. In terms of our expenditures, we don't operate big facilities, we don't operate big equipment, we just have 20 people and that's the bulk of our expenditures. And that's tough because as things go up, salaries and benefits, right? It's not like I'm gonna walk in and say, oh, you know what, we need a 10% cut from you, Joe. I need you to give me back your salary, part of your salary next year. So it's a ratcheting effect that things go up. It gets more expensive unless we cut staff. It's preferable. In terms of where we line up in the county general fund, so out of 48 expenditures we looked at the budget, we came out as 42nd. The county contributed in 2024 almost $825,000. So it was a 15th of 1% of what the county spends in general funds for these different functions. We're right above noxious weeds. And noxious weeds guys are really cool. When it comes to the city, and that not everything is like, in the city budget, it's not everything is in departments, so this table is made up of like 2 or 3 other tables, information brought together. But out of all of this funding from the general fund, almost $300 million, we are just over 1/4% for the city funding. So, just above housing, and the reason why housing is so low is because they operate with a lot of federal grants, so. Yeah. In terms of our services, where you get stuff from, so both provide legal, we fall under the umbrella of the city when it comes to finances, HR, those things, and IT, so we're on the city network, and then you can see a variety of things. In terms of our organization, this is the county commission, this is city council. They both have appointees to the planning commission, and also it's planning commission and board of zoning appeals, so the same people on those two. 14 members, 7 from the city, 7 from the county, and I think they're absolutely wonderful. I don't always agree with everything that the individuals will say, but but I think all individuals are wonderful. And that's why I love the planning commission, is because I don't agree, like people don't agree on there, and we get the opinions of the community. And I have planning commissioners come out and say, gosh, Scott, when they're brand new, they're like, I don't know if I should really be on here, I'm not an expert. And I'm like, that's great, because we do have people who are experts, and you can provide this other perspective that's really valuable. It's a wonderful group, and they work really hard. They will have meetings that will go from one, they have meetings every week. They'll either have a meeting of subdivision, or they will have a meeting of the planning commission. And the planning commission meetings will go from 1:30 until 5 o'clock, 4:30 typically. And they don't get paid, they're just doing it as volunteer service. And it's kind of a challenge, because I don't know how difficult it is as an elected official to find volunteers willing to put in that many hours. And the other thing too is, you're not super popular if you're a planning commissioner, because all of a sudden you got an audience of, the room was packed last Thursday because it was so controversial, the controversial cases. So anyway, tough job. I really appreciate those folks. So 7 of them, a mix of city and county, will end up on the subdivision committee, and a mix of them will end up on the advanced plans. Subdivision is exactly what it sounds like. That's where we take our subdivision items, and they really chew through the details there. Because if they did it at a planning commission meeting, we'd be there until midnight. So they do that, subdivision items, meetings. And then advanced plans, we throw everything else, so policies, studies, neighborhood plans. And then there's a bunch of other boards that they end up serving on too, just as representatives. Then for the city and the county, for the city, so the county just has this one, and then there's an additional board of nuisances. For the city, we've got the Delano Advisory Committee and the Historic Preservation Board that we also staff. This is our org chart. Looks really complicated, but it's not too bad. This current plans, they do subdivision and zoning. This is zoning enforcement, so we talked about what they do. Advanced plans, they do neighborhood plans and comprehensive plan, and then admin And they do the agendas, they do the minutes, they distribute all the stuff and really keep us functioning.
So zoning enforcement for businesses or for,
For everything,
For
so
everything.
residences, businesses, all of it.
how many people are you down to now?
Down to, well, we've actually grown in the
Okay.
past, I'm very, I say thank you very much because we have been able to, add probably 3 positions, I think, in the last 5 years. And there's been an admin position, so, and it was tremendously helpful, and then we have 2 associate planning positions.
And does your budget include the neighborhood inspectors?
So I really should put in a slide here about MABCD because they're kind of our sibling organization. I think they're the bad twin, we're the good twin, but I'm just kidding. But they're great folks and they do a lot of really great work. So they do permitting and trades and all that kind of stuff. That's what they do. And we do the zoning subdivision, we do some licensing stuff for the city. Okay, any questions on this?
Well, how many people are on that previous slide, like that planning board, the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission Board, how many people are on that?
7 from the city and 7 from the
Okay.
county, so 14 total.
Thank you.
And are they all still developers like they've been in the past?
When you talk about perspectives, let me just go through the list, because we do have some, right? We do have some, and I'm so glad to have that perspective there. I would be worried if it was the only perspective. And so we have a person who I'd classify as a neighborhood activist almost kind of person. We have a realtor, we have a developer, we have a person who used to work at a railroad company. We have someone who's involved in finance. We have someone who's a farmer. We have someone who's been a local landlord, but a commercial spaces and really kind of got onto it, I think is kind of a side business that grew into their full-time business. We have someone who works at an auto repair shop and does festivals or those kind of things. So pretty diverse assortment of folks, and that's just the few that I can think of off the top of my head. There's 14 members, and we have an architect, an architect done. Okay, so what we do, I'm not gonna go through all this, but just know that we do a bunch of different stuff in these divisions, right? Current plans, advanced plans, zoning enforcement, and then planning department 2023. So in terms of our caseload, this goes back to 1985. If you can read that from back there, your vision is 1985 all the way up to 2023, and you can see that our peak was probably around 2006, 2007, right in there. But we have been on this upward trajectory. This is year to date in 2023, but I think we ended up somewhere around here. So overall, we're seeing an upward swing in cases. The types of cases that we saw in 2023, and again, I'm excited because we're very close to having the 2023 finalized. We can update this, but the majority of them are zone change requests, that's a zoning thing, administrative adjustments, that's typically a zoning thing, conditional uses, a zoning thing, community unit plans, a zoning thing, and then plan unit developments, a zoning thing. So the majority of them are zoning cases. These are the numbers as you track them. You see these black bars in there because these case types didn't exist for some years or they got discontinued. But it gives us a total count of cases. So a whole bunch of different things that we work on. In terms of non-subdivision cases that have gone to the planning commission, we reached our peak in most recently in 2023. 2024 was a little bit lower, so we were kind of closer to the 2022 numbers, I think. So, but we're staying pretty busy. When you figure that's 269 cases that went to the planning commission, and they have 24 meetings a year. So, pretty busy. The number that I look at, keep an eye on, is this number down here, percentage of meetings exceeding current plans division capacity that's supposed to be capacity. And in 2024, it wasn't nearly as bad, but what happens is if we exceed the capacity of our staff to process these cases, then we have to pull staff from other divisions to help work on it, or current plan systems are working overtime, to kind of get these things done. And I'm okay with that happening occasionally, but when we start to get a string of 2 or 3 meetings, they start to get kind of stressed out, and it's like, well, we need to help now. But again, that's where those 2 associate planner positions have been, and will be. Big help. Non-subdivision items in MAPC case, this is just to show you that the orange line is our staffing levels in terms of what we can do. I don't know why there's a break here. And then you can see that it's just kind of up and down. I've put multiple years on here, and I'll tell you, there's not a pattern that emerges from this. It comes and goes. Subdivision cases at MAPC, so 2023 was 75, 2024 was slightly lower than that. But what we have seen is that the cases, although there's fewer, the number of lots that are being created from those cases is significantly higher than what we've seen before, which means there's more residential properties developed.
But they're all high end.
I don't know. I honestly just don't know. I would have to dig into that and find out more. Yeah. What we've also seen a lot of is duplexes. And duplexes have come about to help address the affordability. Now, there's other things that come, there's different formats of housing have different things to be aware of. We can talk more about. We've actually got a portion about duplexes, but that's a whole other. Okay, and then subdivision items at MAPC, we had 2 planners at the end of 2023 because we had overlap with the retired planner. That's why that was. Number of lots in 2024 is much higher. Cases where they're located and types, so located throughout the city, every district has cases going on. But it's interesting because CUP are commercial projects that are taking place. These light purple are custom zoning, and they're kind of in here. Yeah, so just a variety. And in subdivision cases where plating is taking place, you see that the majority of those are on the fringe. Out in the county, similar story, in that every district had cases taking place in a different variety of cases. In terms of our staffing, we talked about that. So we are a very young group. In 2023, we had 6 staff positions that we filled out of 20. So it's pretty significant for our department. 2024, I think our number is like 4 or 5 positions. So we're seeing some churn also. Okay, and then we're hiring currently senior planner position, associate planner, admin aide has been filled, but we have a zoning inspector position part-time. Okay, so anyway, since 2020, this is pre-2023, so from 2020 to now, it just got, I'm just overemphasizing that we're very young. Okay.
Well, why do you want to put emphasis on that?
Yeah.
Why?
Why do I do
Yeah.
it? Because in the field of planning, if I get someone who comes in brand new, they're not gonna know how our processes work. They're not gonna know, we have a whole ramp up about how we do our recommendations, who we need to send the reports to. There's just a lot of details that it takes time. The other thing too is, I think it's helpful to have background and a sense of the community, so that if you're working on a neighborhood plan, you can anticipate what the needs are gonna be. Likewise, with a zoning case, that you have an understanding of the dynamics of what is taking place in that area and what the past precedent has been with other zoning cases in the area. There's a lot of kind of sense that you need to develop over time in addition to the processes.
So how long do you think it takes from somebody to, from day one when they start to the point where you feel like they're, I don't know, a mature planner? And I'll give you an example, like the police department, one time I was at a meeting, they said it takes 5 years,
Yeah.
so.
It's gonna depend on the individual, and I wish I had a firm number that I could give you. But my ballpark would say 4 years before I really would feel confident that I can hand them a project and they can complete it and do it accurately and meet community needs.
So it's what we're seeing here then with the churn and stuff, that's a pretty big deal.
It is, and what it does is it places additional burden on our staff.
Sure.
Who are managers, because then they're reviewing this, I mean, I spent this week, I probably spent 2 hours, maybe more, between 2 and 4 hours reviewing and editing staff reports, materials. And that's a big part of my job, but I'm catching stuff that division managers should be doing too. So as part of our challenge is not only producing the work, but making sure that it's high quality and meets our standards.
That context is helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so our accomplishments in 2023, again, we've got another thing that we'll do for 2024, but solar is a big one that we've worked on recently. Nightclubs, short-term rentals, we had finished that up, and got that whole program running. Home occupation daycares, we got that wrapped up too, and now another iteration is gonna launch.
Just a quick question, so, in one slide you had, you showed the little dots with the ones that, zoning. So PUDs, take a pipe, chart, those variations from your normal zoning. So a few years back, you guys created a kind of accelerated, I call it, accelerated zoning process that kind of deviates a little bit here, but it all ties into if you're building in certain areas or concepts that cities kind of pushing forward, we place talks and stuff in here. It makes it more expeditious, more beneficial to get those PUDs. That's which they.
No, well, I think it's a good statement to highlight PUDs, because there's something to be aware of in terms of an accelerated process. I've got some information on that one. So the PUD process is where, just as Lonnie said, your custom zoning, it is, hey, none of the existing ones are working for me. I'm gonna draft up what I think the zoning should be for this property, and then we're gonna bring it to you. They'll bring it to us, we review it, and the planning commission and the city council will decide whether or not that's a good fit. Typically, it's modeled off of an existing zoning district, but then we'll have some changes to it. We're seeing more and more of, we're seeing more of those. And I can't put my finger on one particular reason why, but I think a contributing factor is that we're seeing redevelopments and reinvestments in areas, and that our existing zoning code sometimes doesn't work for those those projects they're trying to pull off, which are unique. And so we see PUDs because of that. Now, in terms of the accelerated process, it's actually in the place for people update. We have not passed or approved anything about an accelerated zoning process. It's been a discussion over the years.
What they do is it makes it more flexible. Oh, yeah.
It can, it's a double-edged sword, because there's trade-offs, because you can have a custom zoning district, which yes, can make it easier for you to have your combination of activities on a given property. But the hardship is that it can make, if it's not well written, it can make enforcement of it more difficult, because it is custom. You have to review those details to understand what's allowed, what's not allowed. So there's a trade-off to it. Okay, I'm gonna keep moving. We're gonna go past trend. We talked quite a bit about that. Let's go ahead and switch to the other one, which is I think it's like black and yellow, and it's I think it's planning 101. Are we doing okay? Everyone hanging in there? Okay. Do you need a break? So please, I need a break.
I'm curious, could you speculate on why you think that there's so much, you have a problem perhaps maybe with retention or a lot of churn?
Yeah, so number one, when I first got there in 2020, we had a number of staff members. When I got there in 2003, some of them were the same staff members who had been there. They were all kind of the same cohort in terms of ages. And so we saw a mass wave of retirement. So Stephen Banks, Kathy Morgan, Bill Longnecker, Dale Miller, all these people retired in a wave. And out the door walked, each of them had 20 years of experience brought in the planning department. The other thing that's happened since then is So we've hired one staff member, who, it's a competitive job market, right? And we hired one staff member who was looking for, kind of more promotional opportunities quicker, right? I think there's kind of this, when the job market's hot, I think people are looking for that. And so they hopped to another community. We saw one leave to go to a consultant firm. I'm trying to think, we had one administrative person who just didn't quite fit, didn't make it, like, we needed to have stuff out accurately and on time, and it just wasn't a good fit. So those are some of the reasons why we're seeing some churn. I'm trying to think what some of the other ones have been too. The other one, another retirement. We had another retirement. No, we've had like 2 or 3 retirements in the last couple of years. So
what I'm not hearing is compensation. You go to city
No.
council, it sounds like sometimes I hear folks say, well, we can't pay as well as out in the community, and I don't know that I've ever seen that quantified. But it's good to hear
Yeah.
that the city's not paying lower than people go.
I don't think I would ever come and say, we're getting compensated so much that you don't need to worry about it at all. But you're right, it's not I don't think that's the primary factor. And I think we're very competitive when it comes to pay. And I think that even when we're not, I think our quality of life that we offer is so high that it helps kind of seal the deal, right? Because in a couple of instances, there have been planners who've been working in other communities, but they've been living in Wichita because of the quality of life. And so we were able to say, hey, your commute goes from being an hour or 45 minutes to instead being 10 minutes. And by the way, there's the YMCA is right next door, you can go work out, or there's lots of different places to eat, and just think about it. And after they give, usually that's very helpful. The other thing too is that I think in this environment with inflation and the city's, the city being willing to say inflation is a factor and kind of this cost of living and factoring that in, that has made us especially competitive with other communities, because some other communities just have not done that. That's probably more detailed than everyone wanted, but it's my quick thoughts on it. Okay, everyone ready to go to the next one? Okay. Uh-oh, I think I lost you. Okay, so we have talked about the planning department and kind of our internal functions. Now we're gonna talk about how a case actually gets processed. And so if you've got questions about notification, this is gonna be your opportunity. If you have questions about what particular things are allowed and how can we discover that in certain zoning districts, this is gonna be your opportunity to talk about that. Okay, so we're back on the road. Awesome, thank you. Okay, so, and thank you to you all. I always do this at the beginning of this PowerPoint presentation because zoning is something that affects our lives, and we'll talk about that, but it affects it in a very significant way. Not many people are not a lot of people are willing to take the time to ask questions and learn about it unless there's a particular need for their individual property. So thank you for being willing to do that. So we'll cover all of these things. So planning impacts generations, because where we locate a school, where we locate the residences in proximity determines how easy it is to get to that school, right? How we lay out the street grid determines how easy it is for people to walk and bike as opposed to having to own a car and maintain a car, right? So how close we put jobs and commercial centers to residences also impacts who's going to have the job opportunities to get there. So there's lots of things that come from this. And we'll talk also about some of the ramifications from planning that haven't been so good, when people have intentionally done planning in a way to prevent people from having access to some of these things.
We need you to come to the Sustainability Integration Board. We have a group of people there who are, they think that if you're trying to make things walkable or bikeable, that you're telling them they can't go outside that area. There's a campaign against plan.
Well,
An action plan. So we need you to come explain to these people what you're talking about.
okay,
They
well,
don't understand.
We'll see about it if a request comes, we'll see.
Alright, I'll ask
so-
you that.
So, how we do it, we've talked about all of these, so far. It really, planning is a process, we've talked about the planning commission and how that's involved. And ultimately, community goals and golden factors in particular in Kansas. So, why do we do planning? Quick synopsis, planning 101. So back in the day when we, agrarian functions, lots of people lived on farms. What you did on your property probably didn't affect what your neighbors would do, but wasn't affected by your neighbors, or didn't affect them that much either, right? Because it's kind of lower intensity uses. Then what happens is industrialization happens. We start to see factories come along, right? We also start to see mining start to get more intensive with these different machines and everything that can take place. We're starting to see technology that leads to things like digging underneath people's houses and subsidence and all of these other, because as new technology comes, new opportunities happen. As new opportunities happen, sometimes we learn, whoa, that wasn't what we intended or wanted to have happen. Zoning came about in large part because of industrialization. You got Chicago and you've got the meat processing plants. Well, you had the sewage that was coming out of there. You had the smell. You had all of these things, right? Zoning comes about because of that. You have cholera that happens in London because you have polluted wells because of the contamination that's going in, and people are getting sick because of it. Well, planning and public health emerge from this because you have lots of people together in different conditions. You have New York and tenement housing, right? And so, not that this configuration did it, but in particular, it was overcrowding, lack of access to air and light. Planning came out because of that. Now, these are all issues that planning is kind of developed to help resolve. I also want to talk about that there are some challenges, and planning is a tool, and it can be used for good, and it can be used for bad. And this book, I think, really covers it pretty well, in that zoning for a long time was used to go along with segregation.
Red line.
Yes, there was redlining, and that was more of a business thing, but in particular, there were some zoning aspects that came along with that. So I just want to acknowledge it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this presentation on it, but just know it's a tool that can be used for good or bad. 1893, the Chicago World's Fair, absolutely amazing by all accounts. They did, a lot of these were temporary buildings that they just did with plaster and wood, and they just threw them up temporarily. There are a few buildings that were long-term, so I think the Museum of Science and Industry that's up there, you think about the park, Century Park maybe, or Millennium Park that's along the lake there. Some of the buildings were permanent, but most were temporary. Well, a lot of people go to this and they think, my gosh, this is amazing. Why can't our cities be like this when I'm back at home? So out of this comes the City Beautiful movement. And the people who contributed to the World's Fair, some of them have been doing work in other cities like New York. You see the City Beautiful movement of parks and parkways really catch fire across the country. Denver, it does it. That's where I grew up. You can see the different parks and the chain of parks and parkways. Wichita had it. So we have Central Riverside Park, North Riverside Park. We've got kind of this parkway that kind of started to connect those. So all of these places are starting to do this. So anyway, that's a history of planning too, is not only trying to prevent the bad things, but also trying to promote good things and organizing cities in a way that will benefit residents, people who live there. So,
I can just tack on to that,
Yeah.
anybody who's interested. Devil in the White City is a book, and it goes, even though it's about a serial killer, it goes into a lot about the World's Fair, and I learned so much. It was so fascinating. So anybody who's a reader, it's a fun read.
What is it called?
The Devil in the White City.
it's a good book.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of this. So we've got the zoning code. In case you didn't know, City of Wichita and Sedgwick County, they have zoning in place, so every property is zoned unless it is right of way. So every property will have zoning. Gosh, I know it's really faded, you can't see it, but in the zoning code, there's this really handy dandy table, and it lists all the zoning districts across the top, and it lists all the defined uses. And you can look at this and you can say, C, so that is a conditional use for bed and breakfast in SF20. Or if you look and you find a P, you can say it's permitted. It's permitted by right. I don't have to do any zone changes. Sometimes you'll see a C/P, which means under certain circumstances, it's permitted by right, and under other circumstances, it requires a conditional use. And then you can look at this handy little column over here, which will tell you which portion of the code to look at in order to deal with town. So this is the most important part of the entire zoning, right there, in a nutshell. The zoning also establishes, so sometimes plats do this, and the plat will override the zoning if the plat does mention it. But if not, the zoning establishes your setbacks, so you can't build in certain areas. And sometimes that's for utility reasons, so we don't want you to build your house too close to the back of your property, because often that's where the sewer line is running, we need to be able to get equipment in there and get that dug up or do whatever maintenance. But sometimes these are there for aesthetics, and I don't know how so sometimes we require you to leave parts of your property bare without a building because we want it to look similar to the other properties in the area, right? Better for worse, sometimes that's the case. So setbacks, they can be really good and useful, sometimes they can be, well, interesting. So in terms of the zoning process, so we have an application that comes in, it will go to the planning commission, it will go to the district advisory board. Both of those will go to the city council. City council decides whether or not to send it back or whether to move it forward. And they can approve it, or they can publish the ordinance or not approve it. This is very, very slimmed down process of how it all shakes out. There's different types of invites for public participation. So one of them is the development application side. This is actually not required as part of the code, but is required as an MAPC policy. The difficulty with this, there's all kinds of enforcement difficulties that come with this. And right now, the county is wrestling with the idea of, should the county require signs? And then for the city, I think the question is gonna come up is, should this be part of the code as well? So,
Yes, it should.
well, part of the challenge becomes then, how do you prove whether or not a sign was actually installed? What if it gets blown down by weather? What if it gets stolen? What if it gets vandalized? What if it isn't installed? And if it's not installed, then is it grounds for a lawsuit if someone doesn't like the outcome of the case? And so there's all kinds of interesting dynamics at play with these. So again, there's a policy right now of MAPC, at least 13 days prior to the public hearing. Now, we're just talking about whether or not a sign should be installed. The format of the sign is a whole nother question. Some communities require 2x4s or 2x2s to be driven in the ground and the board put up. It's all about what's the right fit for Wichita, right? So a lot of communities do similar to us, which is this size of sign. It's very temporary kind of thing. Notification letter is required. So for city cases, it's required a minimum of 200 feet. For county cases, 1,000 feet. Now for the city of Wichita has adopted a policy that it varies. And so for up to an acre, it's 200 feet. For 1 to 6 acres, 350. And you can see ultimately over 25, it's 1,000 feet.
But 200 feet of something in the city is not very long.
Well, it depends. It depends. If I'm in an industrial area, absolutely not. It just goes to probably the properties that are adjacent. In some residential neighborhoods, that can be a fair amount of properties. It just depends on what you mean by a lot. So
A normal block is about 600 feet.
Yeah. Yep.
So 200 feet, don't go along the block.
so about a third of a block. Yep. Okay, so that's the policy. The notification letter, it goes out to not residents, it goes out to property owners. And maybe this is another item that we're working on. There's been a lot of conversation at city council about who should receive it. And I think the feedback that we have received from the council is that it should go to both the property owners and the property itself. And that's one more thing we're working on. We haven't quite gotten that one formalized yet, but we're working on that one. And we require them to get the addresses from the title company, because we don't want any shenanigans where either the owner is providing us with the list and they're just, who knows where they're getting it from, or we don't want staff to be the ones who are pulling it, because that creates a whole nother question about if something's missing. So get it from a title company.
I know at times our neighborhood association president will get them.
Yeah, so as a courtesy, we also send out an email, and I think a letter to the neighborhood association if the case is located in the neighborhood and if we have the contact information. So, they would maintain that with the staff in the city manager's office, and we just use that list to generate that address.
That's helpful.
Yeah,
It's helpful if you've got an active neighborhood association group.
yes.
So, and Brandon's probably more yours. I know a few years back, we were trying to encourage or force neighborhood associations to register their board members and their information, contact information. How's that?
I'm gonna start it back, but Richard Ruth, president of WIN, told me that that was government overreach and I needed to stop.
I'm gonna say, how about we
Okay.
move on to the PowerPoint presentation, because that sounds like a whole nother topic. So here's what we've got in terms of the notification area can be, and in a number of cases, is different than the protest area. And you might say, okay, Scott, well, how does that happen? Well, it's because by state statute, the protest area is 200 feet. The notification area, as you saw, for some city cases, can go all the way up to 1,000. So be aware of that. Why is the protest area important? Protest area is important because by state statute, if over 20% of the property is represented by protest petitions submitted by the owners of those properties, then it requires the city council to have a supermajority vote in order to approve the zone change associated with the case.
Can the city change policies relating to that?
No, you've got the cities, the protest area is established by state statute. Now, notification, you can change that because you're simply notifying, but in terms of the zoning process, the state establishes the limits on that.
You think it would, and this kind of goes back to history here. 200 feet, well, that's not actually immediate people around you, butting up to you and this stuff of nature. When you talk about communities, even people a block and a half away here, I'll put something here. Club, when my kids got to walk past to go to school.
Yeah.
And they live a block two away. I want to know.
Well, and there's, you know, the thing about it, yeah, people look at the protest area and they think that's super important, and it is important. But the thing that I like to remind people is that just because you're not in the protest area does not mean you can't be involved in the process. You can come to the DAB meeting, the planning commission meeting, you can even go to the city council meeting and watch. You can send note, I mean, there's all kinds of ways to be involved and provide input. So just know that. Here's,
Another note,
yeah,
the council majority is not interested in expanding the notification area. Same conversation that day. I said 500 feet and everybody else just kind of said no. So
Yeah.
that
I'm
conversation.
okay with not expanding, but I'm not okay with the notification of each neighborhood association residents or something. But I do believe if you're able to force neighborhoods to register, we give a lot of privileges to.
I'll follow.
yes, sir.
Addressing notification, is there a way to see staff reports either
Oh, yeah, yeah.
after or?
Yeah, absolutely.
before DAB meetings?
Absolutely, great question. So staff reports are available because they're published as part of the agenda for the planning commission, or they're published as part of the agenda for the DAB meeting, or you can always contact the planning department and ask us to send it to you. So very, very happy to do that.
Okay. Usually the agenda for like when you go online and see what meetings are being.
Yeah.
My experience is often they're summaries. the agenda PDF, for instance, is few pages.
Okay, maybe for the DAP meetings, I sometimes, I am familiar with some DAPs of attaching the entire, PDF. If you find that there's a meeting that only has a synopsis and you're looking for the full thing, please do reach out to the planning department. We're more than happy to email that out to you. We just simply don't post them individually on our website just because of the volume of what we've got. So what we do, package them all together for the particular MAPC meeting, post. The MAPC packets are generally about this thing.
I don't know how you get anybody to volunteer for that.
Well, I think you gotta put the honest back on the neighborhood association. I think you do a great job in getting the notifications emailed out about what's coming up on the agenda and giving the synopsis, location, area, people change, request it. You can do a great job here, but it's only good if you can get it to the people who are affected by it. Saying that here, say, hey, you come to a DAB meeting, but nobody knows what the information is gonna be presented at the DAB meeting. A lot of times the DAB representatives, they only get a few days before. And if they don't talk to some of their constituents or the area they represent, or presidents, and it's just their opinion.
Yeah, in a dream world, it would be awesome if we had, folks' email addresses and there was a geography, like a tie to it, and we would automatically be able to do that, but we're not quite there yet, so
It's come
it's.
true now. We got neighborhood associations, and they should know who live in our neighborhood association. And we got neighborhood connections and everything else that they should be able to say, bam, you need to look at this.
Yeah, well, there's benefits in being, participating in the association, so. When it comes to the publication, so in the past, we were required to publish it in the newspaper. We still are, but it's not to the same degree. The entire description now goes on the city's webpage. Here's an example of that. So it lists those particular items that are going to the MAPC. And it's again, the city council does not hold public hearing. Public hearing for these cases, formal public hearing is held at the planning commission. So that's what the notification is about. So here's where you can look up those agendas in minutes. We also have a webpage where you can click on the dots and see the case number. Unfortunately, our case management system is not quite as robust as we want it to be. So we're working on getting a replacement for that. This is what it looks like to the members of the public. You can see when the meetings are. We also have a document repository where you can look up older cases, see the information related to it. We talked about the neighborhood associations. We also send it out to city and county staff. And this one is the listing of the neighborhood associations that are registered with the city. Planning commission, we talked about those. Do know that if you're going to speak on an item, I would encourage you to reference the golden factors. This is what a staff report looks like. I'm not going to go too in depth given the time, but there's an overview of it, background, case history, what's around it, conformance to the plans, and then a recommendation and a review of the golden factors.
You might tell them where to find those golden rules.
So the golden factors come from a court case, and so if we reference them and we review them and we put out points related to them, because if this would ever be contested and go to court, that's what the court's going to use to determine whether or not it was arbitrary. Protests, we've talked a little bit about protests, how those can be submitted, is what one looks like. This is what a protest map looks like. We covered that one. District Advisory Board, that photo didn't quite come out. City Council, we've talked about that. And then there are different roles. I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna stop there because in the interest of time, we want to cover places for people, we'll just have just a little bit more time to cover that one. So
Jump right to that.
yeah, if we can pivot to that one. And
We're good with this. Go right to the people and places.
And places for people, that in and of itself could be a whole nother. I mean, I can make anything into an hour-long presentation, but there's a lot of adventures that have happened with places for people, and so it's kind of got its own story to share. Oh, I think I'm gonna need some more help. I don't. Oh, here we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, we're gonna go over kind of the background of it. We're gonna talk about the current status, and then if you really want to get into the details, I've got slides that have information on these two. There's a third one that I just didn't have time to plug in, but we could look it up on my laptop if you need to. But the incentives and the economic development component of this, there's a whole nother series of slides on that. So, there's opportunity to ask questions, feedback, you been doing background. So we have the comprehensive plan that comes out, it's a community investments plan. It ultimately leads to the creation of places for people plan, and there are three big focuses that come out of places for people. So community investments plan is kind of a unique comprehensive plan because it really focuses on infrastructure a lot. But another major part of it is this urban infill strategy. So number of public engagement opportunities with this one. The trends that they were looking at, fiscal constraints, smaller household size, preference for more transportation options, and competition from abroad. It's kind of interesting. I have commentary on all of those, but we'll keep going. The infill, reversing patterns of decline, reducing pressures on the fringe for growth, more efficient use, using existing infrastructure, and helping to improve the quality of life, right? Hopefully these are all things that folks agree on, because that's generally the consensus coming out of the plan. In the plan, it identifies this inner kind of area, established central area. It's kind of a unique area in Wichita compared to what's outside of this, both in the built environment and the characteristics of what's going on in there. So out of this then comes Places for People plan as a later planning effort, and it focuses on the established central area. So it provides a vision, strong neighborhoods, vibrant and strong economy in there, and that this would happen through reinvestment, walkable design, multimodal transportation, and a variety of housing options. This is a map just showing different nodes that were recommended and different areas of stability and opportunity. I will skip past that because it's just know that it's there, and we can talk more about that later if you've got questions. Lots of public engagement as part of the development of this process. So why was walkability in there? Well, walkability, we're seeing a preference for that as part of the planning process for this. We also know that there's a lot of benefits from this, one of which is property values. National studies have shown that the more walkable an area is, the higher the property values, even if it's just an increment. Personally, I think this is the most important thing you will probably learn today, hopefully, or you may already know this, but it's a refresh. So finances are always tight, right? And I think almost every budget cycle, before city council is asked, what are the priorities and what are we gonna cut? How are we gonna, what's most important to you? Well, part of this, think about this, is that the current conditions, so this is Grove and 15th Street. This is not super fluent. These are not $1 million mansions. This is 15th and Grove. And the total appraised value is $771,000. There are, oh gosh, I can't remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lots that are vacant, right? Just vacant residential lots. If we get homes built on all of those lots, it more than doubles the total appraised value. And the real kicker on this one is that it doubles the value without increasing costs. Because what are the most expensive things that the city provides? Fire, police, and infrastructure, right? And they're already being provided in this area. That is why infill is awesome when you're talking about a budgetary standpoint. But these are also people who are going to fill vacant spots and contribute to the quality of life, the neighborhood resident engagement. There are so many more benefits. But one that people often overlook is the finances, and that's why I am focusing on that. A lot of people don't think about these numbers. There's also another dynamic about walkability. So that was infill. This is on walkability. So we took, this is a few years old. We took what we call the Reverie block right across from East High. And then we took the Wesley, this Wesley kind of fast food area. And we did the total assessed value. Oh, we don't have the total, but we have the assessed value. It comes out about $260,000 per acre for this one. At the time, multiple buildings were vacant. The buildings were vacant, folks. over on this side, the assessed value is $220,000 per acre on average. And these are vibrant places. Why in the world would the place where Chipotle and McDonald's and these other restaurants are located across from one of the biggest employment centers in our region, why would that be worth less on a value per acre value than place that has vacant buildings? It's because of the parking. Because when you think about your property tax bill, I don't have it here. When you think about your property tax bill, there are two big factors. One is the land value and one is the improvement value. The more parking spaces take up means fewer buildings. Fewer buildings means fewer improvement value. So although it's about the same amount of area in land, the more parking you have, the less that your land is going to, the tax value contribution is going to be to that. Does that make sense? It's kind of
less taxes.
yeah, less taxes.
Oh, okay.
Which means fewer. Now, how much do we collect for sales tax? Not very much, because if you remember, we only have sales tax to contribute for what the county passed way back when to fund transportation, roads, and to reduce the mill levy for property taxes. So, okay, now a kicker too, and the places.
But my concern is the walkability piece of
Yeah.
it, though. You're saying because of the increased parking by assessment. Not because it's not lost, because it's technically.
Yeah, well, I'm actually just talking about the financial aspect, but you're right. The more parking lots that you put, the more curb cuts that you put in, the more vacant space that there's not anything going on that you have to trudge across. All of that contributes. You cannot have, in most cases, 90+%. You cannot make a place more car friendly and more pedestrian friendly. It is going to be one or the other. And that's just a fact of physics. Yep.
I'm not a homeowner, so I can't appreciate the dilemma between one's property taxes going up, the opportunity cost to sell. But I wonder if there's a fear that, for some people that hear this, that if I'm a property owner, I might be encouraged to build more parking because it means less taxes that I have to pay
I see.
per year, and I could not necessarily care about what happens when I sell it.
I suppose there is that. I'll tell you that probably does happen in some urban core areas, because if there's a demand for parking and you can just put up a sign and charge people $20 to park on your parking lot, and they've got an old dilapidated building and you don't want to reinvest in it, yeah, that probably does happen. But will the average, does that apply in the majority of situations? Probably not, and simply because the parking demand isn't there. So,
But is the parking demand also code?
yes.
You have-
Yes.
Places
So here's the great thing about it is, so I've just told you about how we can really contribute to the quality of life of our community, how we can make ourselves more financially resilient, all these great things that can happen, not by providing no parking, but just by not providing lots of parking, right? Well, guess which single department requires parking, and you don't have a choice about whether or not you're gonna provide it easily. I'll give you a hint. The director is standing right in front of you. The planning department is we carry the burden of being the worst when it comes to probably the finances of our communities. And that is because we require you all, everyone, to put in parking. So, and you don't get a choice in how much, and we've got it all nailed down. We are just geniuses. We've got this. We know that a museum requires 333 square feet of a parking space for every 333 square feet. How do we come up with that number? Did we go out and do a survey? I have no idea how we arrived at that. We are just geniuses and we know this.
You really are.
So anyway, know that. And then the other thing too, sorry, it's a wonky slide, it's all messed up, but
How many parking spaces is it required to have bar for a bar?
oh gosh, I don't know if I have it on there, but it's in there. club in the city, we've got 1 per 2 occupants.
Yeah.
So you require people that you have parking for being drinking, for that.
Yeah, which contributes to drunk driving then because. The other thing too is just in terms of space, and I don't remember the notes on this one, but this slide really points it out, is that this is in Delano area. By our parking requirements, we often require you to put in as much, if not more, parking than you would building. So just know that. And there are places where historically buildings have been done without parking, and we forced them to be closed and they could not operate, not that they weren't operating, they stopped operating for a period of time, and no one could come in and use that building because it didn't have the required parking. There's a great book on the high cost of free parking. I'm not gonna, but a lot of parking is simply just not used. The other thing is there are other communities that actually inspired the study that we did. They find the same thing. Again, this is a lot of building value because it's multiple stories. There's not a parking lot with it. This Walmart, huge. But the challenge is that on a per acre value, their parking lot does away with a lot of the value that's there.
So what's the status of that discussion?
Oh, well, that's actually part of the status updates.
Yeah.
So we are doing we've hired a consultant team that's done this in other communities, so they bring that expertise and that knowledge. They are going to look at our code and they're gonna talk with members of the community, and we're gonna get an idea of whether or not the parking requirements that we have in place help us achieve our community goals. And if they're not, then we're gonna have a discussion with them about what the changes should be.
Who's the consultant?
Claire, something, yeah, it's it's, it starts with a C. I can't, Clovitas or something like that, it's, yeah.
That's-
Uh-huh.
And that's kind of where some of these PUDs are coming in, kind of as to me, as a Band-Aid in between what you're trying to get. I don't think it's now, because that allows the developer to go in here and say, well, based on the current requirements, put the zoning code in here, I'm supposed to have 2 or 3 parking spots here per unit or something here, or even for the other thing in here. But if they're showing that most of my traffic in here is, it's gonna be walked up here too, it's not gonna be people driving, parking.
We have a couple processes that you can go through. You could do a PUD, you could go rezone to central business district. You could ask for an adjustment to reduce your parking, and you could ask for variance. So we have a number of different ways that you can get a reduction in parking requirements, but the challenge is that it's just another step that you have to go through. The one thing is that in the central business district, years ago, they had a lot of really good foresight, and we have no parking requirements in the central business district. Which is kind of funny to me, because when you think about the central business district, I think, there's a lot of parking lots that are there. So even by not having that requirement hasn't meant the elimination of parking, it's just providing them an opportunity to do that. But where it's really paid off, though, in some ways, is in Delano. Because in Delano, a lot of businesses and properties have been rezoned to central business district just to get away from the parking requirement. Because if you think about it, there's this great article that came out in the Wichita Eagle, and everyone talks about how unique Delano is and how it has this different feel to it. And everyone talked about their neighborliness and all that, and there's great stuff that's happening there. But the thing that everyone didn't talk about was the fact that there's only 1 or 2 parking lots that face onto Douglas. The rest of it is building frontages. So, and that's because the zoning, which then had to be rezoned to allow for new parking lots. Yeah.
The process by which Central Business District eliminated its parking minimums, what is that process?
I wasn't there for that. It happened in like the 80s, I think, or 90s, but I believe it was a change to the Unified Zoning Code, very similar to what we're about to go through for the entire thing, but it was focused particularly on just Central Business District.
So that goes before City Council and they vote on it?
So it'll go similar to a zone change for just a property. The zone change, a code change will go to the planning commission, it will go often, it'll go to the DAB. That it's not not certain, for certain, it depends on the topic, but often they will go to the DAPS and then it will go to the city council. Yep. Okay, current status and places for people, I'm so sorry, folks. We've just got a lot to talk about. I'll try and keep this quick. So with the zoning in place for people, there was discussion about doing fast track zoning, so that if you met certain design criteria, you would be approved either by right or through an administrative reduced process. We looked at that part, we drafted it, then what happened is we saw a real influx of duplexes all across the city. And those sometimes required a zone change in order to take place, and sometimes they were very controversial. So what we started to do is we started to add conditions, and this was brought up by there was an instance where it was very controversial, and actually an elected official said, hey, you have these really interesting design standards that you're working on. Why don't we apply those to this particular case, and maybe that will help resolve the issue. And it did. And so going forward, then planning staff started to attach these conditions to all these duplex cases that would come in the established central area. It was all well and good until there were a couple of incidents where people who were applying for the rezoning then went to go get their building permit. And when they showed their design, and the folks downstairs said, that does not comply with what your zoning requires in terms of design, then people got very frustrated and very upset very quickly, because they had agreed to this rezoning and they thought they knew what they were getting into, and they did not. And then it created some real headaches for folks. So what happened after that is that there was a discussion about, well, is it appropriate for planning staff to really be including these recommendations for requirements without any policies that explicitly called for that? And so we've paused on including those recommendations in cases. So that's kind of where we are with the designs discussion. Also with the zoning, with the overall changes to the zoning code, it led to a discussion about, well, maybe this isn't the right approach to do it on a feature by feature basis, like how many windows, how many whatever. But rather, maybe the better approach is, in some communities, they're doing entire patterns. Remember like the Sears and Roebuck kind of houses that they talked about? Well, in some communities, they're saying, if you use this particular design and you've got 20 different designs and you can pick from one, if you use any of these, then you get fast track pre-approved process. But if you don't, you have the option of doing your own. You don't have to use these designs. These are an option that you would have. And that these designs would be approved by the neighborhood association and others before they're kind of given this certain status. That's an approach that maybe would work better than arguing over the small details about how big is this window, is this really meet the definition, all that kind of stuff.
So is that in place?
It is not in place, and it's a question that I think is out there for the community to say, is this gonna be a good fit? At this point, it would take outside assistance to help us with this one. So we have submitted a couple of budget packages for that one, but have not secured funding for that one yet.
And when you say duplex, you don't just mean two families.
We mean two dwelling units.
Okay, so it is just two.
Now the thing about it is duplexes is where the discussion was really hot and heavy, because that's what was being built in a lot of these infill areas at the time. I think there's a lower hanging fruit on this one, which is I don't like to do things kind of whole hog usually. I mean, I guess for the community, in my experience, it's usually not been a good fit to go whole hog, but rather to try things in increments. And if it works, keep expanding. I think a good way to do this could be accessory apartments that would go in the back, they go in the backyard. And if there's some cities like Seattle's an example, there's a bunch of others who have pre-approved designs that if you use those, your permitting, your building process is just much, much quicker.
We actually have a couple of those in my neighborhood already that have been there for long term.
Yeah.
Other lots, yeah.
And
Are you pushing for that?
in this PowerPoint, I've got a whole bunch of slides, but we're actually running way over time already, and I'm sorry. But, so that's a discussion. The other thing, I put a note on here because I didn't have time to update the whole slide, but we're also looking at that code amendment with the zoning code, so. So moving on, we're gonna talk about land bank real quick. So, in terms of this process, it's recommended in place for people plan. The ordinance was approved, appointments were made, and operations started up. That's been operating in Housing and Community Services Department, so I haven't been too involved in that. I know that there's been some bumps in the road with that one. It sounds like it's been challenging in terms of getting properties in, determining what the best and highest use of the properties are, and kind of working through that. So I don't know exactly where that's at, but I do know that it's got to the point where it's up and running, but whether or not it's a good fit for Wichita, I think is still an open question.
You know, and these land banks have been around quite a while. And, you know, I look back at some of the old publications and stuff. And land banks were probably good, but most time these land banks right now, to get property into those banks here, either it's foreclosures, cities foreclosing on some stuff, or somebody got some title stuff, and they just donate property to them and stuff. But for it to be a real value in here, you want some properties that are in the land bank that are main artery type properties here that help create not only economics and stuff of this nature. I guess I like what you do with to a degree with the duplexes. However, somewhere or another, in the bigger picture thing, it should be more like to me a homeowners association here, that you put a limit on how many rental properties. Because you got areas out here now that's all you're getting. I'm not saying any businesses, you got places to live and housing. You're filling a lot of that. But people need all the other creature features, Scott, you know, businesses, places to go to work, medical facilities, they need all those things. So the incentives in here, particularly in here, to bring those in here should be a part of that big picture too, besides just saying, hey, we can put two living places in one lot.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, there's a lot to this issue. It gets pretty complicated pretty quick. One more, this will be the last slide, is with the incentives and the nodes. This is another one of those prongs. We did an incentives analysis, and what we found is that often in Wichita, there's a variety of different neighborhoods. There's a spectrum of how they're doing economically, right? There's some neighborhoods where new houses will pay, the market can fund new houses and they will go, right? There are other neighborhoods on the other end of the spectrum where it requires a really big subsidy in order to make development happen, whether it's commercial or housing. And then there's places in the middle where it's going to take a little bit to kickstart it and whole scale, graduated scale of it. So through the incentives analysis, we really determined that in a lot of places, unless you got to be strategic about it, because in a lot of places, it's going to take more than the existing incentive programs that we have to really flip the trigger to kind of get momentum, the tipping point to get new housing and commercial development. So we started looking at an affordable housing fund. There was a process to engage a group of stakeholders to talk about this, come up with a recommendation. They produced a recommendation. The Affordable Housing Fund got up and running. In addition, there were infill permit fee waivers that are done by MABCD. So there's those two things. And then Sally Stang and folks over at Housing and Community Services have been working on the Affordable Housing Fund. And I think there's been a really unique opportunity with HUD properties and former public housing properties here in Wichita that they've been leveraging affordable housing funds for that one too. So, and I think it has to go with fixing them up, selling them, using the profits from that to reinvest in the community. So there's a whole chain sequence of events that are taking place. I can't speak to it super in depth because I'm not an expert on what's taking place there, but I want you to know from this slide that those two things are in place in terms of the Affordable Housing Fund and the infill permit fee waivers. So
Well, go ahead and wrap up.
That's all I've got. I was just gonna say thanks for being
So,
here.
bottom line, getting back to the earlier comment, it seems that the main point of the places, or one of the main initiatives was the infill development in PCB. And one, how's that going? Bottom line, what's your feel about how that's going? The second, personal, it seems to me that it's very frustratingly slow. And part of that, it seems, is the continuing approval of subdivisions on the outskirts of the city, where if you can build there for cheap, why, go through that hassle of doing it in the city. I understand there's other competing factors in that, but that seems that, given a choice, why not do it in that easy area rather than in the, have to deal with it, capital inside Israel.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway, I guess my comments to that is, it's just really complex, right? And it's interesting because the developers who are developing things on the fringe, they will sit down and they'll have a conversation with us, groups about this. And you get into the infrastructure, getting the tie-ins, you get into the having to dig out existing foundations, you get into the fact that if I build a house, it needs to appraise at a certain value. And if my comps in the area, not necessarily the neighboring houses, but if there's no comps in the area because it's a new home in an existing neighborhood, that's gonna be a challenge off the get-go. But then even if there are comps and they're not appraising at a high enough value for me to have someone to get the mortgage, all of this is super complex. And so that's why I think the good news, the really good news, is that the city of Wichita has made some substantial strides in terms of trying to implement this and trying different things, right? So all of this together in terms of the fee waivers, doing the affordable housing fund, and I think it was like $5 million that got plugged into that. Looking at the parking from the zoning, there's all of these different ways of trying to address it, but I don't know that we've singled out like the silver bullet, right? That's gonna solve all of this.
Has the city, I don't know, the fish department, look really just at the economics of how much it costs the city to support the subdivision development compared to what it would cost to do the infill, and therefore maybe spend more on the infill? And I'm talking, long-term cost, I'm not talking about.
Yeah, no, to my knowledge, there's not been that kind of study done.
Okay.
Sure.
Kind of a follow-up question, maybe this doesn't touch your department at all, and I haven't heard anything about like the water shortage. And what
yeah.
is going on, or maybe I don't know, do you have,
Well,
you put things or water, or, what's being done so that we're not all bone dry here soon?
yeah, so there's one thing directly that does touch us is that we are responsible for the landscape code
Oh,
and enforcement of that. And so as part of that, places that have to comply, like we had a donut shop that came in and it was new and it's out on the edge and they need to do the shrubs and some other things. These places get deferrals now on putting that in until the next appropriate growing season where the water emergency is lifted, right? So we're doing deferrals on all of those. So you're gonna start to see new developments that don't have that kind of landscaping investment. Then, in addition to that, though, I think we are tied into it because indirectly because of the lot sizes and the coverage, building coverage, places where you don't have buildings, you're gonna either have to hardscape it or you're gonna landscape it, right? And so inherently, the size of the property and how much the building occupies will contribute to how much landscaping there's gonna be, so.
well, I don't know, I've been paying attention to this, and long-term, this could be a long-term drought. And I'm really frustrated, and maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem that there's a committed change to the types of grasses and things, and the xeriscaping and so forth. There's no time like the present, right? Other communities have done this.
Well, and to that point, I was actually there at the meeting where Gary Jansen with Public Works presented to area developers about, to tell them about the drought situation and to start that conversation about what if instead of fescue, they were planting buffalo grass, or they were doing Bermuda or some kind of mix. So that conversation is taking place. It's not to the point where there are requirements for that, but I just know that that's.
Why not requirements now? I mean, is it just too much of a political hot potato and nobody wants to be blamed that now we have grass that's not as pretty? I mean, there's, the lack of urgency is frustrating for me and others.
Don't know that I can provide a single answer to that, other than to acknowledge that your frustration. Yeah, I think it just gets, I think it's part of the challenge of it's something different. It's a question of whether or not a requirement is a good fit for Wichita. I do know that in this presentation, Gary talks about the need for recycling water and the opportunity for recycling water. So I think that's been big. That's a big emphasis that folks are looking to help resolve this kind of long term, at least give us some water resources.
But they also want the city to grow, you know, it means more houses, more yards. It's like,
Well,
Yeah.
and trees.
Yes,
yeah.
When the city grows, it doesn't need to grow, we need to infill. I hate urban sprawl, as I said already, but what happens when they go out into some of these established areas where they've got a tree line and all this, and they want to put a house right there. So they tear the trees out. Is there something in code that can require them to leave trees that are there, because new trees are not ever gonna grow?
so that was a discussion as part of the tree policy, and the tree policy that's put in place was really about the city and city projects. But there, at the time, there had been exploratory discussions about should this involve the private sector and private projects. For our part, in zoning, this is actually one of the things that I will always kind of look back and think, wow. So for some projects, we do require, for a lot of projects, we require a landscape plan to comply with the landscape code. As part of that plan, we can do it as part of that plan or as part of a separate site plan. There's a project where there's a particular vegetation and people are interested in preserving that. We can require the site plan or landscape plan to indicate where that is and to ensure that that remains on the property. That's always an option. One where we didn't do that, and it really, I kicked myself on this one, is on 2nd Street, driving through College Hill towards Hillside. On the right-hand side of the street, there's a vacant lot that was turned into a parking lot. There was a tree on there that was probably 100 years old, and it was huge. And we thought we had it in the landscape plan and that it was gonna be preserved. But it was not explicitly called out as part of it, and so we lost the tree. And you know, we were operating thinking, yep, we've saved it, but because we didn't explicitly call it out, we didn't. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's important, those established trees, especially ones that are that old, some of them are aging out, but many of those established trees have a deeper root system. And they can survive some of this lack of water, where new trees can't plant those.
And you get into, you know, we get into this, when the development's coming in, I mean, there's just all these factors to consider about where are they gonna put the building, where's the utility lines gonna come, all of those kind of, and to what degree do those get considered as part of the tree policy, I think is part of the challenge in making something that fits for Wichita, right?
Even to the parking lot, where does everybody park? If there's a tree, it's under that tree. Yeah, really do. They
Well-
want to have a little bit of shade.
Unless you just washed your beard.
Exactly, that is the other side of the story that I would hear, yep.
Yeah, I'm just saying, it increases the attractiveness of a property if there are existing trees on it.
Yeah.
So it would make sense monetarily to keep those trees instead of spending a fortune on landscaping. and then planting new trees that are just gonna die because there's no water.
Well, thank you for sharing. I don't, I can tell you what we do as part of our process. Yeah. Are there any other questions? I mean, really, I've gone way over time, but I appreciate you all. Hopefully it was helpful. I gather that it was. So if you have any questions after this, you think, oh gosh, I really wish I'd asked that, please feel free to reach out to me. Yeah. So, thank you for learning about it and share with your friends.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, Scott shortened most of his presentation. He always has a lot of information to share. I'll be quick. I don't have a lot of updates. My first one, important one, the next District 1 breakfast, February 1st in this room, 9:30. I actually just confirmed everybody while I was sitting there. We will have Miss Kansas, Leslie Smith, who
Okay,
just went and competed for Miss America. She didn't make it, but she went and competed. She'll be here. USD 259 will be here, so they have an upcoming bond issue. So we'll have representatives from them here to talk about what that means, $450 million investment they'd like to make. And then we'll also have Dr. Nathan Emery, who works for the city of Wichita, operating the WARP program, which is something I'm really excited about.
WARP?
Yeah, Wichita Area Restoration Program. If you look at our agenda review from yesterday, we talked a little bit about it. WARP is something that I have kind of been at from the beginning, wanted to see, started from work that the city had been doing before I was elected around amnesty days, trying to get fees paid on suspended licenses, and a bunch of other things. I love those because it gives people an opportunity to get out of some of the financial burdens that they're under from tickets or other things like that. And now those stories are crazy. I know somebody who had $10,000 fines, their original ticket, I think, was like ridiculous stuff. But I like to find ways to help people in that sense. So we have been talking through it. Staff, I think it was Nathan himself, but Nathan, Dante, Robert Moody, a few other people I've been talking to, found this program called DEAR, which started in Durham, probably still in August under. But one of the bonuses of being a part of NLC, talk about why we pay for NLC travel all the time. I moved to Durham, so I was like, oh, phone call. So I called. And we set up this call with all these really important people there, council members, county commissioners, judges, all of that. And they talked through how that program works, and it's amazing. But we built the program similar. So he's going to talk about that and what that means. And with all the work Senator Cruz-Cadova has done on suspended driver's license, hopefully revoked driver's license at some point, if the legislature will take it up. All of that's kind of incorporated in the work. So everybody who has a suspended driver's license, and there's nearly 250,000 people, work can help. So he'll talk about some of the results. It's really successful so far about getting people their license back. Now that doesn't mean full license. Sometimes that means a restricted license, but it's better to have a restricted license to get pulled over than suspended license. So he'll talk about that program. I'm really excited about that. So we'll have 3 presentations. Again, Ms. Kansas to talk about her journey, and if you don't know where you'll get to, and what her platform is, and then we'll have those other presentations. So everybody, especially people that have a suspended driver's license, this is a place to be. Update wise, starting off this year, if you don't know, this is my final year on this. We've now passed all the milestones that won't repeat, because New Year's, I'll have another New Year's. I'll pass all of that. Everything from here on out is my last, so it's my last year. This year will be interesting. The council, I was not able to stop that encampment ordinance. I don't know if we agree with it or disagree. I did not agree. But I was not able to. It passed 4-3 on the original and 4-3 on the second reading. My real concern has just been, I think we were rushing on that. House neighbors help. They don't fully trust everything. Some of the words I think I used to out of context. I didn't mean we were bad about that. If you are in shock because life has hit you, you have just been unhoused for a number of years, somebody taking all your stuff is gonna throw you into another spiral. More than likely. If you have just become homeless, you're already shocked that you just having a house, ability to get around, potentially a job, to out on the street. And although on social media, people condemn pride, most of us have some form of pride. If you wanna go from the house you were just in to a shelter, that's a culture shock. That's one that people may not want, and it may be a strong culture shock that keeps somebody on the street. I know we have to build trust that people don't wanna come to the shelter. They may be able to articulate that it makes sense to be in there, but it's not mean they will go. And the numbers that we saw before the second reading showed out of 110 contacts, I think we had 73 refusals. So we're rushing now for enforcement. I know we have great staff, they're gonna go through training. My concern has also been something that will get beat up by some folks in the public. I do have people that call me multiple times a day complaining about somebody in the house being visible, like sitting in the park. Sometimes you have to see what's wrong with our society. And having somebody homeless in America is kind of crazy, because we're just making it work. But we see it. I think it's a reminder that we have more work to do. But I was not supportive, but it did pass. Unfortunately, begins on the 13th, Monday. So as of Monday, enforcement will change. Some of those 72-hour notifications will become 48. And at this point, I have no way to stop that, but it will happen. The shelter is open though. I don't think they've hit capacity just yet, but they have been over 200 a couple times. I think capacity is 266, and some of that is overflow space. So I have concerns about what happens if they get to capacity. I can't remember if the requirement was taken out. I think the requirement to have a bed may still be in there, but we weren't able to reduce the fines as much as we could. The fines 500, 200, Councilmember Hoheisel tried to reduce it to $20. That was rejected, still $200. So that has begun, unfortunately. Also, in this last year, you probably heard me talking about housing for about 6 months. Parking actually pushed that back. Troy Anderson was leading all the housing work that we've been doing. Parking went a lot longer than we hoped, but parking is now done. So we're looking at a workshop at the moment, tentatively scheduled at the end of February, to go over all of the housing work we've been talking about. It will be a huge package, international code insertions into our code to look at safety, to look at defining black mold, because it's not defined, what enforcement will look like, some potential other changes. One thing I've not been told no on yet, keep pushing, is removing occupancy in certain situations. So everyone saw the Embry Gardens examples, news stories I was involved with, the Councilmember Hoheisel. Situation like that, I think we should be able to take occupancy. What that means is they wouldn't be able to have anybody staying in that apartment building at all until those issues are fixed. I also believe they should pay for relocating people. It should be up to the person done wrong. I don't know if I'll get that, but we're talking. And then we're looking at some changes on the state level. Councilmember Hoheisel is really working hard with Representative Howardson, Representative Howell, who are open to looking at some changes in how the state looks at housing. Right now, we've been talking a lot about the eviction process. We've been talking a lot about, I won't say abandoned property, but some vacant property, and trying to come up with creative ways that heirs who know or don't know can be reimbursed for a property, but we get that property into the hands of somebody who's going to fix up that house or build on a house in that lot. Still talking through that. We don't have a solution or language. We're talking about those things. The most unpopular thing that I am talking about, because it's not a we thing, and I'm not doing it a lot because I'm going to kill the progress on where we're at, but I do believe this should change, is the state statute that requires you to pay rent. You're renting. It's a requirement, and there's nothing attached to that. So that means if it snows and half your unit is full of snow and water and birds are in there and squirrels, you have to pay rent. You have no other choice, and if you don't, you've actually broken the law. So if you go to eviction court, they're mad at you, complaining about all the snow and squirrels in your apartment. You go to eviction court, you didn't pay rent because you needed to get your family to a hotel. You broke the law, judgment for them, no matter what. So I've been talking with them about that, there's hesitancy in Topeka because I think a lot of them see it as a landlord or property owner, it's your right to get paid for allowing somebody else to be there. I don't disagree with, but I think there should be exceptions. So I've evolved from getting rid of that statute. I still don't agree with it too. Just add some exceptions. Like, you should get paid, but if I don't fix your AC, so they don't care about them all, but if I don't fix your AC in 14, 21 days, keep bugging me about it, you shouldn't have to pay me for it, because you're not living in a place that is really inhabitable for today's standards. If it's cold outside, I think that's a big one anyway, but I'm not fixing your natural gas or your heat or something else that happened and it really isn't your fault, you shouldn't have to pay me rent. I'm dragging my feet. I think that money will motivate a lot of people to fix stuff. But we gotta get that to change on the state level. We have no power or authority on the city level, so to do that, it would just get overturned. I don't believe any people's hopes of stuff like that being real, so. We are working towards that. You'll hear a lot of those conversations. I'm assuming much like the encampment ordinance, you'll see a workshop followed immediately by some form of council vote, depending on what the council says. I'm hopeful we have 4 votes, but I'll be very vocal about that. I want to see some changes in how we do housing before I get out of office. It's only right. I get tired of getting stories. People have all this bad stuff. And honestly, every time I get up here and say it, there's always somebody, at least. And right now, the last time I talked about this, I think I said something that's probably at 13. That's just the folks that reach out. And a lot of people know, because I always give this disclaimer, if you tag me on Facebook, you might get evicted. Because they know if I show up, I bring the news camera. And it's happened. Like I'm gonna say it, it's happened. Somebody tagged me. I hadn't even got to them yet. 2 days later, I reached out. Hey, yeah, I'm getting evicted. They said something about reaching out to the city and your name came up. I didn't even do anything. But I'm happy to show up if they were out with that. So that's a real issue, even with our retaliatory eviction ordinance that we got through. That process can be 30 to 45 days. So you still can get evicted. You might get up to $2,000 later through it, but you're already evicted. We're also talking about sealing evictions at the state level. Actually has some momentum right now. So if that happens, we'll be able to seal them. People won't be able to see it. That'd be a real big deal. We've also educated the lawmakers on the process that sometimes a landlord will use an eviction filing, correct? But that filing shows up on the record. So if you want to leave that apartment, like if you work out a deal to not get the eviction on the record, but you have to leave within 10 days, and the new apartment people or landlord looks and sees you have an eviction filing, not gonna give you a space, and now you broke your agreement. So we could seal that unless it was confirmed, which is not compromised. I don't think it should be unsealed. If you can do it unless you actually are convicted of it, right? The reason I don't think it should be unsealed is because really if that state law change happened, I might feel better about it, but literally you can be evicted, right? And there's no context. So it's not saying you have snow and swirls, it's saying failure. That's the problem. So we've got that stuff going. Past that, we don't have a lot of major issues right now. We're still in drought. I think we're still not enacting part of our tree canopy plan, which is plant trees. We're not doing that right now. Water treatment plant should come online in April. Everything I hear is looking good with that. If anyone was confused by that news story, we did not spend $1.2 million on one art piece. That was not true. That was the art budget for the water treatment plant. 3 pieces came out of that. That was just one of them. I can't think of any major thing going on right now. Yeah, so I am looking for questions if any of you have any.
So when do you, or will you endorse your replacement, or when does that happen? Or do you just never endorse whoever's gonna,
run for this district?
So endorsement really is up to any elected. They wanna do it, some political party don't like it. Only one has filed so far. I do know of two other ones, but I'm not gonna say their names, so that they don't
Sure.
file and say it. I will probably say who I support closer to September, October.
Oh,
So the filing deadline is the first part of June. And for me, whether I like you or not, you have to campaign. Campaigning really shows who you're gonna be in office. So if you get out there and make a mistake, is that just gonna tank you, you're gonna give up, or you're gonna fight back and understand you made a mistake, acknowledge it forward? Are you gonna listen to people, or are you just gonna kind of have your own mind and think you know everything? So whether I like you before you campaign, you have to campaign, and I still, as an activist, I'm still watching to see should I support you, even if you're a friend of mine. So for me, it has to be earned. I'll watch how people interact. I know a lot of the issues in the district, so I'll see if they know that too, or if they just how I'm talking points. And then I'll probably say who I support. And for me, endorsements, I really don't unless you ask. So there's a lot of candidates last cycle I never endorsed that it has. Because I know sometimes my there's Democrats, there's Republicans, I think, do a really good job, but if they have an endorsement for me, that may hurt them. There's also some Democrats that don't like me, so I just, if you ask me, I will. If you don't, no hard feelings.
so you can endorse multiple people?
Mhm.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
During the governor's race, I endorsed the governor. I think I endorsed one of the couple state reps, state senator, some other positions.
But for the same position, I mean, like for your seat on city council, you would only endorse one.
If I thought two were really good, my explanation publicly would be, I don't think you lose with either one.
Okay. I see.
But you need to decide who you want to represent you.
Mhm.
And that's kind of how I would leave it. If there's a clear one, which I kind of think there will be in this case, then I would just say, to me, this is the person I would support. But I also would be telling that person, you gotta go earn that. Just people seeing me say that you're nice doesn't mean you got anything. You still gotta go out and show them why I like you. So.
A year ago, I think it was the January gab last year, the city manager was here, so I don't know when he's gonna come back again. But he said that they were working on measurements for the police department that would be available to the public. Where you're out, I haven't seen anything, maybe I just don't know where to look, but it's important, you know, not just to me, but for other folks in the community that I work with. So where are we on that? And then is there gonna be any community input, things that maybe community would like to see measured, but didn't make the city manager's list?
I feel like there was 3 questions in there.
I
One,
know.
he, so everybody that comes to the breakfast, I asked, and I realized when I felt so bad. I couldn't almost wow. I had never asked him.
Oh,
He came to one because he had to. I forget when that was. It was early on, and I was thinking about it. Like it's been some years. Bob hasn't been here, so I asked. I will ask him. Some point. With measurements, I am assuming, because we haven't talked about it, some of that may be waiting on the SOP amendments that because once that's done, they may have things they can measure. If they don't have it right now, that might be why we don't have that. I'll follow up with them and see. And as far as public input, I don't think that's a problem or a challenge. It's probably something I can help set up. It's probably better citywide. I know in District 1, I try to host a town hall and have that go over. So I will try to get follow-ups on those 2 things to see. My assumption though is the SOPs need to get updated, the executive requirement before they get into how do we measure the effectiveness of those.
yeah, I just feel like there's, with the city, on this topic and many, many others, particularly, I guess, when it comes to these things, there's always, I won't call it a good reason, but people think maybe, I don't know, a viable, acceptable reason to kick stuff down the road. Patience, I don't know, it's just, you have to just wait so freaking long for things, and it starts to feel intentional. I'm not criticizing you, but in general, I know everybody's busy, but you keep hearing the same old stuff and it's so frustrating. There's always some good reason. Jensen Hughes, that was a long damn time ago. Here we are, implementation, a long ways from having it all done. I'm sorry, I'm venting, but
I get it. Government is not to at the speed that I would like it in any department. Even Scott's bringing up places for people, we started that in 2017, 18, and we're still not done with that.
with
It's,
policing black and brown lives where they are with measurements that come out of their own department. It's a freaking crisis.
and to hear after Jensen Hughes recommended some SOP changes, that some of those haven't been changed since the 90s or early 2000s. But it takes that type of light or push to see more depth of what's wrong to start fixing it, and then that takes time to fix. And again, I don't like it either. I like things to, just a couple of weeks or months. But even on this housing stuff, this is something I really was hoping to be in place by now. We talked about actually doing all of this last February. Here we are this February. So I get it. I get the frustration.
Is there anything we can do? Like us sitting here or, folks who come to the next breakfast or come to that, is there anything we can do to be effective, to push stuff along?
Just keep talking about it. Honestly, it feels, so from the inside, I know from the outside how it feels, 'cause I've been there too. On the inside though, what I don't think people realize is that actually gets talked about a lot. So it's one of my favorite people, she's not in here right now. Jane Burns used to bug us every single meeting to have breakfast, anytime she could, about painting crosswalks. It just happened all the time. And it wasn't just me, it wasn't just District 1, she was everywhere. Bob would talk about it. Public Works would talk about it, Alan King at the time, Gary would talk about it. Anytime I talked to somebody, we would talk streets or something. We gotta do those crosswalks, Jane's gonna talk to us about it. So, and it took a while, I know she got frustrated, and then I think it took 3 years, it didn't take 3 years, but it took 3 years, and then $1 million goes into painting crosswalks. It happened, that was her.
All right, I hear you. Or maybe we can go to other DAB meetings, right? And
You can, and I'll tell you, it comes up, and even your name, Twyla talks about these measurements, it comes up, it's just, keep talking about it. When you stop, and it's not something that we talk about, then it will go. Even if it feels on the outside like nothing's happening, the conversation's happening. And as things get completed, then it's like, okay, we know this is gonna come, so how are we going to address these questions of accountability? So you just keep talking about it.
thank you.
What else? I'm quiet.
Oh, 6 seconds.
I know, I was doing like, there's 6 people, I can take 20 minutes. Well, if nothing else, then again, February breakfast in here, we actually will have food.
Okay.
They told me they couldn't make it today, but they will be here in February. We're not having a January DAB because of the snowstorm, so DAB will be in February, we'll have 6 cases. Hopefully we get out before midnight. Of notable cases, Crown Uptown went to MAPC. I still need to watch that. And then that will come back to council. Anybody paying attention to Belmont that did get passed, that can build their parking lot. I don't think we have anything else controversial. The Blackley Drainage Project should get kicked off this year.
Good.
I'm excited about that. The Brewer Center is supposed to open in June. There was some surprise artwork I did not know about that I have now seen. I am really excited about how people are gonna see that. Most of what we showed publicly, and even with Dab saw, is not even touching what's gonna happen in that space. Really excited about that. I have talked with Paul about the bike lanes on 17th Street and the round things.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk to you more about that
Yeah,
afterwards.
I talked to him about
Good,
it. We're
good.
still looking, and if possible, from 135 all the way to Howard.
Okay.
So restriping,
Mhm.
17
Yeah.
east of, Hillside
Mhm.
again. I think that's it. Maybe I should have wrote some notes. Well, if anything, thank you for being here. See you next month.
Thank you.